In the mid-20th century, deep in the quiet farmlands of Wisconsin, a tale of horror began to take root. It was not the loud, obvious terror of monsters or demons, but something far more unsettling, something hiding in plain sight. A weathered farmhouse, a solitary man, and secrets that would eventually shock the world. This is the chilling story of Edward Theodore Gein, a man whose dark obsessions grew in silence until they consumed him, and whose crimes would echo far beyond Wisconsin, leaving their mark on American culture, psychology, and even cinema itself. His twisted legacy would inspire some of the most iconic and terrifying characters ever to appear on screen. Ed Gein was born on August 27, 1907, in La Crosse County, Wisconsin. From the beginning, his life was marked not by freedom but by confinement, psychological chains forged by family, poverty, and obsession. His father, George, was a broken man, an alcoholic who could not provide stability for his family. But it was his mother, Augusta, who truly defined Ed's life. She was a deeply religious woman, rigid, puritanical, and consumed by her own beliefs. To her, the world was not filled with opportunity or joy. It was overflowing with sin. She preached to Ed and his brother Henry that women, except for herself, were evil, dangerous, and corrupting. Sex, she said, was wicked. The world outside their home was corrupt, and only she knew the path to righteousness. Ed absorbed her words like scripture. Where others saw mothers as nurturing, Ed saw his as absolute, a towering figure of dominance, morality, and judgment. Socially, Ed was awkward, timid, and withdrawn. Classmates teased him for his strange mannerisms, and he rarely had friends. He preferred to stay home, reading strange books, dreaming, and clinging to Augusta's every word. From the outside, Ed was just a shy farm boy, but inside, his world was already being shaped into something much darker. By the mid-1940s, the fragile foundation of Ed's world began to crumble. First, in 1940, his father George died, leaving Ed, Henry, and Augusta to fend for themselves. Henry began to rebel against Augusta's suffocating grip. He worried about Ed's dependence on her. He even voiced concerns to neighbors that his mother's influence wasn't healthy. But then came the brush fire of 1944. Ed and Henry were working together when the fire spread across the land. Later that day, Henry's body was found dead. The official cause? Asphyxiation. But investigators noticed something troubling. Bruises on his head. Was it an accident? Or was it something darker? We'll never know for certain. But from that day on, Ed was alone with Augusta. Just a year later, Augusta suffered a series of strokes and passed away. For Ed, this was not just the loss of a mother. It was the collapse of his entire universe. She had been his anchor, his obsession, his godlike figure. Without her, he was adrift, alone in the family farmhouse, surrounded by memories and shadows. Ed boarded up her rooms, leaving them as shrines to the woman he worshipped. He confined himself to a small, filthy corner of the house, where loneliness and imagination began to intertwine in disturbing ways. The seeds of horror had been planted. Now they began to grow. To his neighbors in Plainfield, Wisconsin, Ed Gein was strange but harmless. He did odd jobs, fixed fences, shoveled snow. He babysat local children and helped with chores. They saw him as eccentric, quiet, awkward, but not dangerous. A man frozen in boyhood. But inside his farmhouse, a different reality took shape. The once lively home became a tomb of silence and decay. Dust collected, wallpaper peeled, newspapers piled in corners. And in the stillness of night, Ed fed his dark curiosity, an obsession with death, anatomy, and the possibility of bringing his mother back. On November 16, 1957, the small town of Plainfield was shaken. Bernice Wardens, a hardware store owner, disappeared. Suspicion fell on Ed Gein. He had been seen in the store the night before. Police went to his farmhouse to question him. What they found inside would shock not just Plainfield, not just Wisconsin, but the entire nation. Inside, investigators uncovered a world of nightmare. The farmhouse was no longer a home. It was a chamber of grotesque curiosities. Ordinary household objects had been twisted into something macabre. Human skulls turned into bowls. Furniture covered with human remains. Masks crafted from faces. Boxes filled with personal relics of the dead. And in the shed, the body of Bernice Wardens, suspended in a way that horrified even seasoned investigators. The world had never seen anything like it. When questioned, Ed spoke with an unnerving calm. He admitted that after his mother's death, he had begun visiting cemeteries. By moonlight, he exhumed the bodies of recently buried women who resembled Augusta. He brought them home, where he tried to transform their remains into objects, clothes, and even something more, a woman's suit. In his words, he wanted to become his mother. He also confessed to killing 2 women. Mary Hogan, a tavern owner who vanished in 1954. Bernice Wardens, in 1957. Though not a prolific killer, his actions blurred the line between grave robber, murderer, and something far more disturbing. A man trying to erase the boundary between life and death. In 1957, Gein was declared mentally unfit for trial. He was sent to a psychiatric hospital, where doctors studied him for over a decade. By 1968, he was deemed competent to stand trial. He was convicted of Bernice Wardens' murder but found legally insane. Instead of prison, he returned to the Mendota Mental Health Institute, where he lived out the rest of his days. On July 26, 1984, Ed Gein died of respiratory failure at the age of 78. He was buried in Plainfield Cemetery, in an unmarked grave. But his story didn't die with him. The revelations of Ed Gein's farmhouse became fuel for the press, criminologists, and eventually Hollywood. His crimes weren't just crimes. They became symbols, tapping into primal fears. He directly inspired Norman Bates in Psycho, 1960. Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs, 1991. Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. It was his obsession with skin, his loneliness, his farmhouse of horrors that became the blueprint for these terrifying fictional killers. Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre in particular drew heavily from Gein's crimes. The isolated farmhouse, furniture made of bones, masks of human faces. Though fictionalized and exaggerated, the film's roots were firmly planted in the grim reality of Ed Gein. Today, Ed Gein's name remains etched into true crime history. He was not a mass murderer. He was not prolific. Yet his psychological complexity and his bizarre crimes made him larger than life in infamy. His story continues to fascinate, horrify, and caution. It is a stark reminder of how isolation, obsession, and untreated mental illness can twist a life into something almost unrecognizable. And so, the so-called massacre in Texas was never truly Texan at all. Its roots lay in the cold Wisconsin soil, in a lonely farmhouse, and in the mind of a man consumed by shadows. From graveyards to silver screens, Ed Gein's story endures, not just as history, but as the dark seed from which some of the greatest nightmares in popular culture have grown.